Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know you're all still getting connected, um, I want to thank you for joining us today. I'm Sarah Chapman, and I'm the Executive Director of the nonprofit Media Burn Archive, which is based in Chicago. Media Burn collects, preserves, and distributes documentary and experimental media produced by artists, activists, and community groups. Our mission is to create positive social change by amplifying underheard voices, both in contemporary dialogue and the historical record. And this event is part of an ongoing free series called Virtual Talks with Video Activists, which creates conversations surrounding media production. And if you enjoy this event, we hope you keep coming in the future. In 1 week, we're going to be screening videos from Beyond Media Education's Women in Prison program. This was a nonprofit in Chicago that operated from 2000 to 2013. And we're going to have some of the program's participants talking about their films that they created. And then 2 weeks after that, we're going to have an event with activist filmmaker Judy Hoffman, who's very close to our hearts here at Media Burn. And today we are very pleased to be presenting a screening of East Kentucky Flood, which was produced by the Center for Rural Strategies in Whitesburg, Kentucky. And we have three of the filmmakers with us here today, Joel Cohen, Dee Davis, and Mimi Pickering. If you want their full bios, you can check those out on mediaburn.org on the event listing. But I'll just say that all three have been working at the intersection of media and social justice for decades. Joel being a former Chicagoan, now based in Massachusetts, and Dee and Mimi being part of the Whitesburg, Kentucky community that is one of those depicted in this film. They are all good filmmakers, good people, and good friends. So on July 27th, 2022, a massive flood spread through 14 counties in East Kentucky. The flood killed 45 people. I always have a cat with me, I don't know if you can tell, and displaced thousands more. A year later, the affected communities remain on a long road to recovery. The area the flood hit is one of the most rural in the country, adding further challenges to rebuilding the community. So we are going to get this screening started right away. It's going to be about a half hour long. During the screening, please stay muted so that we can all hear the audio. Captions are available. If you go to the bottom of the screen, there's a little button that says ... more. If you click on that, you can click captions and you can turn on the captions so that it is easier for you to understand the dialogue. And what else? The event is being recorded. So if you miss part of it, or if you want to share it with someone afterwards, you will be able to. And we will send out an email to everyone who registered after the event with that link, hopefully tomorrow, maybe if not Monday. Yeah, so again, it's 30 minutes long. And then after that, we will bring back Joel, Dee, and Mimi for our discussion. And we hope you will join us in that discussion, either by raising your hand and talking out loud, or by putting your questions in the chat. So enjoy, and we'll see you back in a half hour.
We knew it was going to rain, and heavy, that night.
It's one of those things, you wake up in the middle of the night and you think, it's gonna flood.
As I was on duty, I got the first national weather alert for the area of aerial flooding. Well, I get up, I was like, is it even raining? I was like, I'm gonna go over here and check the river. We have a river gauge on the side of the building over here on Main Street. So I was like, I'll go check the river. I checked the river, we have 7 feet of water at 2 a.m. This is 2 a.m. Ordinarily 2 feet. So we're at 7 feet.
I could hear it raging, and my old house had been leaking a little bit, and I heard it start up pouring. So I got up and set buckets and pans.
After I had went upstairs, we heard a big loud crash against the house. It kind of felt like an earthquake. And that's when the foundation blew out in the back of the home, and then the water filled up my basement. We got about 10.5 feet of water in less than 10 minutes. I mean, it was fast. It came in, it was like ocean waves outside.
Part of the story is I was moving out. I was buying my first house. I'd been saving the last 5 years, and I actually kept trying to buy this house because I grew up in McRoberts and my family lives right up the road, and I knew all my neighbors, and my sons lived here for 3 years. And I made this post about what a good home this had been and how important it had been to us, and it had gotten us through a pandemic. And so finally, I ended up falling asleep around 2 a.m. And we had an air conditioning unit going upstairs, and I was tired and I fell asleep. And about 2:20, all those alerts kept coming through on my phone. Mine kept coming through in Spanish, so I didn't know what they were saying.
About 1:30, the next door neighbors started knocking on my door and told me that I need to get out, that the floodwaters was already in the backyard and it was raising quick. So I had 2 little dogs, 2 little Jack Russells. So I said, okay. I said, can you help me with my dogs? And they said, yeah, So he got 1 dog and I got the other dog. And by then it was about 2 o'clock, and it went from about 100 foot from my house to I was wading water up to my knees.
It came up so fast. We have goats, chickens. We have a potbelly pig. We lost
6 goats.
6 goats. We lost half our goats.
And we saved the pig. And
that was probably a sight to see. She's
Yeah.
well over 200 pounds, closer to 3 probably. We folded up a tarp and put under her belly. And each of us got on the side of her, floated her out.
Well, we had to float her out. But I couldn't let her drown. I mean,
Yeah, we had to try to save her. But
she was sitting there, nothing but her nose and her eyes and her ears sticking out of the water, and that was just pitiful. I couldn't bear that.
I opened the back door and looked out, and I said, "Oh my God in heaven!" And he jumped up and he said, "What's wrong?" I said, "You better come and look." And when he looked out the door, he realized the water was already up to the carport.
25, 30 minutes it just happened. And it's everything I could do to keep my feet on the ground.
And there's a lot of stories from friends of their friends learning about the flood when they put their feet to the floor and their legs are getting wet, and or water's lapping their elbow, against the bed. I mean,
I was terrified for people sitting on their roofs, and the current was too strong. We couldn't get them with just the kayaks. Last summer Walmart had kayaks on sale, and I thought, where are they going to ride these? Air River is not even high enough. It's like a creek. But thank God everybody bought them because they saved a lot of lives.
I went into her house, as it being chest deep, she were on the couch. It was obviously about neck deep to her sitting on the couch. I was able to float her up and got her right here. And I was like, man, I couldn't get her over there. So actually I just found some adrenaline, and I just was able to put her in that kayak, and I said, we have to go. We have to go now. I cannot swim.
Here where we live, the water might rise in the back and the creek in the back and get in your yard. But when I got up, I looked out the window on the main highway here where I live on, and it was a river. There was no road.
Floods used to be that it would rain really hard and everybody would go to the football field and slip around in the mud, and then you'd come home, get whooped because you were all muddy, but the water would have went back down. This was not like that. This was bad. Trucks floated down the road. It was a bad deal.
The water in here came all the way up to this. So this whole house was basically filled with water. There's a woman that lived here. She needs a walker to get around, and she held on to the top of her porch, floating in the water for 5 hours until someone was able to come and rescue her. And she's in her late 70s.
One guy in particular said, when you go to bed and it's all there, and you get up the next morning and it's all floating away.
Being a photographer, I wanted to get out and photograph what I could. Well, I couldn't photograph very much because I could only go about 100 yards out of my driveway down Route 7 toward Hazard and just saw what it was. I mean, it was just mind-blowing. One of the saddest things I saw is there is a pink Mickey Mouse child's blanket hanging from a tree right up here, up the road here. Some little child somewhere on up the North Fork of the Kentucky River, that belongs to that child. So that was tough. Some things I didn't photograph that I saw. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I ended up making probably about 2,500 images total of the flood. Some of the hardest photographs I've ever made in my life. And I've seen, being a photojournalist in Cincinnati, I've seen some gruesome things before, you know, and had to photograph some sad things and things like that. But this hit home, and it was very difficult to do. The other thing that really blew me away was the ice on IGA.
So we go over Highway 15, we turn down on 7, and when we turned down on 7, the shopping center was in a river, actually. It was just covered up with muddy water. Even though you were looking at it, you still couldn't really believe that it was true. I knew then that we were in trouble.
And Gwen is a pillar in this community. She lives over in Knott County, but what she does for Letcher County is amazing. And to see the power of those floodwaters. Everybody thinks the flood just the water just comes up and it goes down. No. And it was like Godzilla and King Kong went in there and fought. The freezers were ripped off the walls and piled, and just shelves and groceries and everything washing toward the front doors.
The water was going in like a circular motion. It was like a river. It was not still water. It was moving water. And I'd listen to him all the time, and he talks about when he opened the front door of his house, it sounded like the ocean. And that's the way the water sounded. When I first seen the store, I was in shock, and for about a week, I actually walked around in shock, didn't know what I was going to do.
I thought that after a flood like this, that there would be like boots on the ground. The government comes and, hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you or whatever. But it was a learning process where eventually it set in that there was really no help coming, at least not in that form. People coming and doing this business of mucking houses out and getting all of the things out and then gutting the walls and then applying, mold killer. That was just us learning and watching YouTube videos on how to do it. And that is kind of a shocking thing to realize, that it's a sort of ragtag group of volunteers doing it.
Just seeing the need was just so grand, and still is. Yeah. It's just overwhelming, and it's just could be hard to make decisions like, okay, well, which house do we go to?
That's really what's so devastating about these floods. They were so extensive. They impacted so many watersheds that for weeks after the flood, my dad or family would be on the phone with someone, and they'd realize, oh, a lifelong friend, they got flooded too. But because everybody's just been, working so fast and so hard to get things cleaned up, you couldn't check in. You just couldn't check in on your neighbors as much as you'd like to.
You are piecing together a life. You're piecing together culture.
One of the things people say is how they're just so grateful and thankful that they didn't lose their life or lose a loved one. Most of us agree that human lives are more important than tangible objects. I think it should still be reminded that tangible objects do connect us to people and memories.
As people begin to hear, I call them the hillbilly refugees that have moved out of here. They knew we weren't going to get any help from anybody else. And they started calling and messaging on Facebook. What's it look like? Send me pictures. What do you need? So I just tell them the best I could, and when the roads opened up, they rode in here.
I didn't know who the people were showing up to help me, or it was people who I never expected to show up to help me. Like literally people who have very openly disagreed with me on politics, and it's become like a line in the sand for us of we just can't talk. They were showing up and like unloading my stuff. Or I literally turned around at one point, and when I burst into tears was 4 teenagers who I had no idea to this day what their names were, just walked in my house and started picking stuff up and moving it out. And I just burst into tears because I was so overwhelmed, but so much was being taken off of me in that moment of not having to do it all myself.
We're still feeding quite a few. We do breakfast, lunch, and dinner. A lot of the workers, like the Rubicon groups that come around, we feed them lunches and dinner. The campsites where the famous started putting campers, we take food to them every day. We deliver to like other areas, don't have people close. We deliver meals for them.
I mean, the general public can just come in and eat and don't have to worry about paying for it or anything, you know.
While we were doing the cleanup crews, folks were also still coming into our mutual aid headquarters to get different supplies that we had on hand, and we were also giving cash out the door to folks who needed it. It was really obvious a lot of people had difficulty in asking for that help and receiving that help. You know, one thing that I learned real quick was to make it very clear that it was not my money that I was giving to people. You know, I think that made people more willing to accept the cash. You know, one thing that was really difficult was just people saying how ashamed they were. And that was really hard because it's like, it's not their fault. There's nothing about this that's their fault. So that was really hard, and trying to alleviate that feeling of shame that people felt.
So eventually, after about 2 days, there was a load of water came with some paper towels and toilet tissue and some paper plates. You know, I just continued to cook here because we had electricity and people were coming here and getting hot meals. We put out a call for the four-wheelers to come, and they hauled what supplies we could get our hands on out to people that couldn't get out. And I noticed that the ones that have lost so much have been trying to help everybody else.
My resources were my connections over almost 67 years on this earth. We've got 40,000 people around the world that subscribe to what we do. That's a big audience. So the first thing we did was compile an Amazon wish list. And every day, for about 2 weeks, UPS designated a truck whose only thing they had in it was to come to that church. I mean, some are little items, some are big items. And they came. Anything we asked for, they came. One day, I went down to the flood relief, you know, and I was down there and I was riding my four-wheeler and checking on people and taking people things they needed or whatever I could do. And I was down there at Blackie one day, and the magistrate's wife called me over to the side, said, "It's okay, but we think you're in the mob." And I said, "No, I'm not in the mob." I said, "I just have a lot of friends and a lot of places that want to help."
We had a little GoFundMe, and to be able to see people make donations of $25 and $50, but they would always make a comment of, "That was my store when I grew up." So it's generational. They can remember good times. I remember coming in and they would give me a sucker, or I can remember coming in and they would give me a cookie. And so it's just good memories of coming somewhere where someone cares. Father Cisco, who is a priest out of Lexington, who has made 2 trips up here. He came the first time, bought $20,000, came back the second time, bought another $50,000, and had made a commitment to do another 25, just because he wants to help. He wants Eastern Kentucky to come back up stronger. I've never known a Catholic, never, you know, I mean, I'm sorry, but I haven't. I'm Baptist, so I've never dealt with the Catholic. But, you know, I've learned to love him, care for him. You know, it just gives everybody a little bit more variety in their life, I think.
It shows us, too, that it don't really matter what denomination you are. When it comes down to us, we all want the same thing. And we all want to help and, you know, have a servant's heart for one another.
And that's what he said. He said, you know, someone asked him, "But she's not of your faith." He said, "That has nothing to do with it. She's a human. Doesn't have anything to do with color, doesn't have anything to do with anything. It's just compassion for other people."
We're just kind of hanging out, wore out, you know, and wondering what to do. We just plotted our course minute by minute, you know. And this big rental truck pulls in, and these 3 guys get out, and they can't even stand up. I was like, these guys are drunk. And they said, are we welcome here? And I said, well, yeah, everybody's welcome. And they said, we've come to cook for y'all. And they got these coolers of meat and brought them in here. And it was the finest of hamburger and hot dogs and steak. And they had cans of Spam. That's the funny thing. So the next morning, when I get down here, they said, we got you breakfast over here. Well, hillbillies love Spam. I mean, most of them do. And they fixed me up a Spam sandwich on white bread. Now, I really never tasted nothing that tastes no better that morning. And give me a cup of coffee. And they stayed here with us 3 days. I don't think they drew a sober breath while they was here. And they just kept on cooking. That's why I call them drunk angels. They come out of nowhere and they went right back into nowhere. And we don't know. And they had ear gauges and they had big full sleeve tattoos. I mean, they were unlikely looking angels, but I really believe they were angels.
I guess you could say that there is a part of that that is good in the sense that, you know, it's neighbors helping neighbors and a community helping out. But at the same time, like, we only have so many resources and volunteers, and we eventually hit a point where we were very exhausted and we ran out of volunteers. And it just speaks to the need of, you know, institutions with greater resources and money and manpower to be available to help during times like this.
It makes you sad. I mean, you know, I'm gonna go back there and I'm gonna get up every morning, look out the door, and gonna see family that's gone, friends that, you know, their house is level. It kind of reminds you of a ghost town. But you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. Now, whether people move stuff back, a lot of them says they may, a lot of them says they may not. So it's just one of them things that you have to wait and see what they're going to do.
I just don't want people to move away. The people who stayed have been so brave to try and stay, you know, and to find, and we can do a lot with a little here. We always have been able to. And for those who are moving away, I get it, you know, I understand, but I just hope that we can find a way to build housing up off of the creeks, flood-proof our bridges, and use this disaster as, instead of the end of us, as a catalyst for a new beginning, to look at everything that makes it hard to live in Eastern Kentucky and fix it.
Immediately after the flood, there were reporters here from different places, and one of them said, well, what would you tell the people out there who say that they ought to just move out of there? And my answer after a few seconds thought was, I would probably give those people the same answer that folks in California who live in wildfire country would give, or those people who live in earthquake-prone areas, or on the coast with hurricanes, or near a volcano, is that we don't want to. This is home.
So this is the house that I grew up in. My parents bought it or moved in '72, so they've been here 50 years now. And that's my uncle and aunt's house next door. And then flipping around this way, this is my great-grandmother's house. My grandmother left it to me when she passed. This is my grandparents' house here. This area is, they call it number 2 bottom. The reason they call it that, it was the 202 mine for consolidation. You know, and that's one thing about the flooding, particularly in this part of the county, is a lot of the homes are close to the river because that's where the mines were located, and that was some of the flat area that the coal company had to construct these homes. So, you know, people, you know, talk about why do people live so close to the water. Well, Consolidation Coal Company made that decision for everybody about 100 years ago.
Part of the struggle has been that we have been so closely connected to a single industry. It has really driven our economic base and our personality and who we are for a century.
Once the coal boom or bust happened, I mean, you know, economically it's really difficult to figure out, well, how do you move away or how do you leave a place? And I haven't mentioned, like, it's a beautiful part of the country, you know? It's like a really pretty place to live, and you don't have to explain that to people this time of year. You know, you can just kind of look around.
This is my favorite photograph so far. It's really nice. Now it has issues.
Really like the way his arm's set.
Yeah, I love this, and I love these leading lines. They all lead you to his face. When the latest started bringing pictures of her dad's shop, and I had to look at those. It's part of the process. And that looks to be an original drawing. And to see the mold and the... This one just like reaches in your heart and grabs it.
So this is my dad's tattoo shop, the parlor room, and it was doing pretty good, and the flood got to it, and so a lot of the artwork they had in there got destroyed, and a lot of their equipment got pretty dirty, and so they are working on cleaning it up and stuff, and they've moved a lot of the stuff out of the shop.
To be honest with you, right after the flood, I ended up in the hospital because I overdid it, and I lost my spirit. That spirit started coming back, and my strength, and then looking at her photographs. She's been photographing every week her dad in that shop and seeing those. So then one day I just said, okay, now's the time. I just click, click, click. Here they are. Let's run through them. Let's see what we got. I didn't remember individual photographs until I started going back through them and went, you know, that's pretty good. That tells a story. This tells a story, you know. I think the other thing that affected me is when I passed those checks out for flood relief, and I went to all these people's houses, and I actually photographed some of those people. And I looked at those right away, and I started hearing their stories. I think that had a big effect on it, too. My mind is in the right place right now, I guess. The sad thing is there's a lot of people that are affected by the flood directly and indirectly whose minds are still not in the right place and may never be in the right place again.
I heard this term that I think has helped me a lot, and it's post-traumatic growth. There was a guy came, and he used that terminology, and it seemed like I just grabbed on to that, you know, because we've been neglected here, and some of it was our own neglect. You know, I'll shoulder part of the blame. And so, you know, we've kind of been wiped out, so to speak. So to me, we don't have anything else to do but build back and build better.
On this property here, Homes is a nonprofit developer of housing. We do a lot of things. Our main mission is affordable housing solutions. And we've been here before the flood. We'll be here long after the flood. But this is a piece of property that we bought, raw property that we've developed into 4 building sites. The house that we're working on today is for the Morgan family who lost their home in the flood.
You know, it could have been worse. We could have not.
They're not got out.
We could have lost our, you know, one of our. We could have lost my dog. You know, he's a child.
We're trying to get people onto higher ground, out of the floodplain, and this will help us to do that.
God has answered my prayer. I'm going to get my home. And I said, it may take us a little bit, but we're going to have a home before the end of the year. And I'm so excited about that home. We've went and bought some furniture.
Oh, yeah.
I think I'm still processing how to think about the future. And, you know, years ago we did this project called My Story to Tell, and someone had wrote on this postcard that we were collecting, I stayed so I could make a difference. I was wrong. And that postcard has always stood out to me of like, I don't want to feel that way. I don't want to dedicate my life to something and then turn around and feel that way. And this flood has kind of been that moment of like, do I stay? Can I tough it out to stay and stay in a way that I want to make it better and think it can be better? I'm blessed and privileged to say I could leave if I needed to. Not everyone has that here. And I can't leave the people who don't have that option here.
I don't know what comes next. I mean, I do think this flood was a once in many generations event. You know, there's opportunity in this. I mean, people can build back a little better than before. They can, you know, prepare for the next flood, you know, because I think it's on everybody's mind with climate change. You know, is the next 500-year flood going to come in the next 5 years?
We already fight for any attention we get here. And so how do we connect it instead of fighting for those resources? How do we connect it to say we understand what Pakistan is going through, we understand what Alaska is going through, we understand what Puerto Rico is now going through? Like, how do we build bridges so that we're not fighting for resources, instead we're addressing what's actually happening?
Quite frankly, it's going to require a lot of federal money, you know, and an interest in, you know, supporting a region that's really supported a lot of the rest of the country's growth, you know, over the past 100 years. I mean, that's what I hope happens, but I think it's really uncertain.
I'm 67 years old. The amount of money that we will have to do to reopen that store is going to be about 1.5, almost $2 million. I'd worked for 50 years to get it to that part. We was completely paid for, but I'd prayed all my life that Simon would come in and take the store. Never pushed him, never said anything, just silently waited to see if he was going to come in. And then 2 years ago, he decided, hey, I want to be here. I planned on staying with him for the next 4 or 5 years until this happened. And then I really just had to sit down with Simon and Arthur and say, okay, I think the community needs a store. I think it's a huge inconvenience for them not to have a store. And I miss them. And then it's 25 other people here who are trying to make a living. And I want to take care of these people. They've been with me for a lot of years.
We have to understand that it's not necessarily what we want to do and the way we want to go about it. Like, we never wanted this to happen, but you know, it's what God wanted for us. So we've accepted that, and we're going to just try to continue to carry out what He wants us to do. Mom worked 50 years and got the store paid off, so I'm next in line to work another 50 years and try to get it paid off. And whenever me and my wife have kids, try to do the same what her and Dad did with me, not force them into it, but you know, hopefully one day they'll continue the legacy and all that type of thing.
We plan on opening April 1, 2023. This is our home. This is our people. And we have to stick together. And it's been devastating, and it's been bad, and it's hard. But we've just got to look forward to better times and make it come back better. I think we can come back better. I think we can come back stronger. I think we can come back more together. I really do.
Welcome back, everyone. Maybe to start off, Dee and Mimi, could you tell us what your personal experience of the flood was like?
Yeah, well, we live in Whitesburg, but we're fortunate we live up on the hill. And so we actually had our little grandchildren staying with us. And started hearing warnings in the early morning or 5 or so in the morning on the 28th, and then but didn't think that our house would flood because we are on the hill. But then as daylight came about, I think Dee and kind of looked out, and you could actually sort of, where the road was all brown, so it was all floodwaters. And then he and Elliot, our little grandson, went down and kind of looked, and the whole downtown, there are a few shots of it, was covered in water. And then, I work at Apple Shop, and Dee used to, and then we started seeing pictures of Apple Shop, which was really devastating. It's just kind of around the corner from our house, but took on, 6.5 feet of water. So the whole first floor and the archive was hit. So, and then we were safe. We had power, we had self-service, but we couldn't leave town. All the roads were blocked. So we were really fortunate compared to so many people in the 4 counties, Letcher, Perry, Knott, Pike, that really got hard hit. And, just the devastation was amazing in a lot of those places. Breathitt, yeah, I forgot about Breathitt.
Yeah, I mean, the river that's usually this summer pool could be, sometimes it would be just a trickle. You could have, maybe 10 yards across at times. All of a sudden it's 400 yards and just pulsing, going through in a mad rush. And there are objects everywhere, generators, refrigerators, and we live in very steep hill valleys, and so there's not a lot of flat land, and so people tend to live up in hollows, which and little valleys, and all of them were subject.
Mm-hmm.
Elliot was with me when we went down to the flood. So.
Yeah, that was a year ago, but we think he'll remember. And Dee was about Elliot's age or a little bit younger when the last biggest flood was 1957 in Hazard, and he remembers that as a little boy, sort of seeing his grandmother float by in a canoe. But this flood was was it 12 feet higher than 57? Yeah. I think, it was just unprecedented, just amazing. It broke the river reporting gauge, just broke it off, and they're not really quite sure exactly how high it got.
Wow. So how and when did you all start, producing this? And Joel, when did you get involved? I'm going to add you to the mix here.
I think September is when we first started shooting. And, I'm working with Dee at Center for Rural Strategies on lots of different projects. And we have a history of covering flooding and disasters. We covered the recovery of the rural areas of Katrina and Rita devastation in Louisiana and Mississippi in 2005. Yeah. So, but obviously with Dee and Mimi down there and so connected to the community, this was a little bit different. And the fact, I think the power of the piece is really that the people were very comfortable telling their stories to Dee and to Mimi, and because they're from there and because it's part of the community. And I think that's really what comes through in this piece.
Yeah, I think part of the process was people started sending money to Center for Rural Strategies. We were spared by like 4 inches like a brick. It was like, well, we don't need the money. So we started figuring out, well, how do we get money to different people? And we said, well, we'll give them the money, but they don't have to write anything. We'll just come and talk to them. We'll interview them, and they can talk about what's going on. So we could report to these people like Steven Spielberg and Kate Capshaw sent money, some foundations sent money. And then once
but also you gave some of that money to groups that were helping other people. So
that's
you know,
right.
kind
All
of
of
really,
it, all of it
yeah,
to these people who are helping other people.
informal the like mutual aid groups and community centers and stuff, because they were really the ones that mobilized immediately and you know, started helping.
And I don't know, I think maybe it was Joel or maybe whatever. We said, well, if we're gonna be filming them anyway, why don't we just, you know, we decided we'd capture some vignettes, and then it's like, well, why not just make a movie? I don't know how these ideas always just kind of grow, and then it's like, how come we didn't think of that before?
And we do, you know, hope that the flood will be remembered. I mean, tragically, you know, I think there was another disaster of some kind, you know, within a couple of weeks of this flood. So it's kind of becoming, you know, the normal thing nowadays, but I hope we don't normalize these natural and unnatural disasters.
Yeah, I think within 4 weeks, the hurricanes hit Florida, and a lot of the groups that are really helpful and skilled and show up when there's a disaster, they just packed up and went south. And so, you know, that was their job. And then we appreciate all that they did, but in a way, you kind of get in start relief, you begin to see that what you've got to do to recover.
I think it was really moving to see the degree to which the community just sort of came together, no questions asked, to just help each other out. Can you talk about the role of community in all this?
Yeah, I mean, one thing was that people also asked us, well, wasn't it hard to go and talk to people? Wasn't it hard on people, you know, to be interviewed? But what we found is everybody that we spoke to wanted to tell their story. And it was really important that they had the opportunity to tell their story, what had happened to them, and what had happened to their neighbors. And so that was part of it. But then also there really was this amazing outpouring of help for neighbors. Of course, a lot of people have lived in a particular community for a long time, and they may be related to people, but also people were helping strangers. You know, as Angie Hatton says in the film, there were all kinds of stories of people, you know, who had a John boat or had a kayak, or there was one story of one man who took his tractor and went through the raging kind of creek over to some houses where he knew an elderly woman lived, and you know, went up there and knocked on her door and tried to find her, see if she was in the house still, that kind of thing. And I think that happened in, you know, community after community. We heard those stories of, you know, people helping whoever they could.
1,400 people rescued from drowning or being abandoned in the flood, and a lot of those people who did that really didn't want to talk about it in terms of their courage or their extraordinary activity. They just wanted to talk about, you know, well, they're neighbors, we're neighbors, and just downplay it. But a lot of people who you see on the street and you probably wouldn't think that much of them turned out to be true heroes when the time was there.
I want to remind the audience that you're welcome to ask questions if you have them or want to. You can say them out loud. You can wave your hand. You can use the raise hand function. You can put them in the chat. We'll keep talking. I just wanted to remind you of that you're welcome to join in. One thing I wanted to ask is if any of you had, there was a particular like person or story that like really stuck with you. I really enjoyed the Drunk Angel story.
A lot of people did. That was a huge hit on YouTube as well.
A lot of people like the couple who saved their pig, their potbelly pig. Also, it's been popular.
Yeah.
And also, so Joel has recently cut a piece that looks at the IGA grocery store using some of this initial stuff, and then their opening, their grand opening.
That's good. I was going to ask if they did end up opening.
Oh dear.
Yeah, they opened actually on schedule April 1st, and we shot that as well, and we put out a piece. Hey, Geneva. And we, you know, the thing about stories like this is that it continues, right? Just the film itself is just one moment in time, but the stories, you know, keep going. And so we tried to do a few stories, you know, kind of epilogues or, you know, the next chapter as well, because, you know, those are just as important as the originals.
Yeah, and it is, you know, the whole world of filmmaking has changed since when I started with 16 millimeter film, and you were so limited in, you know, what you could do, the expense and all that, and then getting it out and showing it to people. So it's really been, you know, wonderful to get this film out, but then to do these updates. And of course, now we're moving into the, you know, more continuing recovery, but trying to figure out the real housing and the school situation and all that. And so, you know, I hope we'll be able to, we'll have to bring Joel back to Whitesburg and keep doing that, keep covering it. And those stories are on the Center for Rural Strategies YouTube, or is it Daily Yonder?
Daily Yonder YouTube.
Daily Yonder YouTube.
Are they like extended versions of the stories, or they're just like cut up versions of this?
There are, you know, continuations of this.
Okay.
Stories from this piece that are, you know, the next chapter.
Cool. That's great, because I think that naturally what one thinks when watching it is like, and then what happened? So that's really great
Right.
to be able to sort of answer some of those questions.
Sarah, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
In the papers soon after the flood, the coal companies responsible for it were said to be contemplating donating land so that people could rebuild on higher ground. And did any of that actually happen?
Oh, hello.
Maybe I will. You hold it.
Yes, it's happened some, and there have been some donations of land on higher ground that are being converted into housing sites now. And you know, it's like if we probably lost in our county 20% of the housing stock was destroyed or damaged severely. So it's hard to scale up quickly to replace that many homes because people have to live somewhere. The kids have to go to school, and so a lot of people have had to leave but in each county, I think some coal companies have set aside land. It's not yet adequate to the problem, and it's not yet enough of the land that's undertaxed and available that's been used, but the capacity is probably not there from the nonprofit and those commercial housing groups in the area anyway. But they're trying, they're moving as fast as they can. It's just an enormous job.
And one in Knott County, which neighbors Letcher County, the fiscal court, the local governing body, they actually were threatening eminent domain of one, very large coal mineral owner, Penn Virginia Corporation, that owns, thousands and thousands of acres. And the corporation wouldn't respond to the Knott County fiscal court. So they were thinking, well, we'll just condemn the land. And that would be such a radical move, in our counties that have been so coal dependent and so deferential and favorable to these coal land holding companies. It's really a change.
They've had some problems collecting school taxes on that land. I think this is
the last straw.
Yeah, and so it's like it's not paying for itself anyway, and not being, so the problem is it's a lot easier to threaten eminent domain to absentee landowners.
That would be really inspiring if that fight moves forward. I think that just would be such a amazing example of justice if the coal companies or other companies were forced to give up this higher ground land to people so they could rebuild. Because that's the thing that's so terrible in these tragedies is it not only is your home destroyed, but like your land is like really not a place where you might want to rebuild, but it's what you own, it's what you have.
Right, and I mean, and part of that too is that's the most affordable. Of course, land in the floodplain is the most affordable, and people couldn't afford flood insurance anyway. So if you can start to rebuild without a loan, then you can go right back into danger, and I think that's a problem that people are trying to sort through right now.
But a lot of people are, fixing up their homes right where they are. Some of them are raising them up. Some are just fixing them up. And I think they're just gonna pray a lot, that they, if you do that and you don't get flood insurance and you stay in the floodplain, then FEMA says they can't help you in the future if there is another flood.
But there are not a lot of resources anyway. So, I mean, It's not like people have myriad options. People are just doing the best they can.
So when this flood happened, there was a lot of a big flurry of national attention. I know that there were reporters from every outlet were down there for a little while. How do you feel that the national coverage differed from, the way that residents might have portrayed the situation? And are there things that you would tell national reporters about reporting on rural communities? Assuming you're dissatisfied, maybe the coverage was perfect. I don't know.
I don't think the coverage was terrible. I mean, it's more like being a show or being a channel. It's like, some of the New York Times coverage was quite good, and they looked at the schools. Some of the CNN reporting was kind of throwaway, but they showed up. I think it's more that for people who witnessed and experienced this kind of trauma, this kind of event, it's biblical. It's like seeing the Rock of Ages, Jacob's ladder hanging down, and the articles are about, well, when will the schools reopen? Why is the garbage pickup so slow? So once you've gone through something so overwhelming. It's not that the reporting is bad, but it's a little bit irrelevant when you're going through an existential crisis.
Let me ask one thing about you two and your friends. And did you feel any differently about the people in the community? Some of whom you might have known, some of whom you didn't. But did it open you up in any other way to who they were and how it is where you live?
Yeah, I mean, I was reminded how much I liked people. I mean, how much I enjoyed hearing their stories. You know, it's like sometimes you want people to agree with you politically or to fight your fights with you, and they've got other things to do with their time. But there are a lot of people who just stepped up and were decent and helpful, and there wasn't much meanness. It wasn't framed in which side are you on. It was like everybody was pulling for everybody else. I think I don't want to make it sound idyllic. This is like a poorest part of the country. I mean, actually the poorest part of the country, actually the places where people have the shortest lifespan. It's not all peaches and cream, but most of us live there for a reason. And I think in a way, enduring this together with other people in the community made me, it helped me sort through a hierarchy of what's important and what's maybe ephemeral.
I mean, in the time I've lived in Eastern Kentucky and lived in West Virginia, we've gone from, strong union country with the United Mine Workers and, strong Democrats and progressive in lots of ways to, really being Trump country. And it's gotten, discouraging and depressing and disappointing. And, what's happened in Kentucky as we've just turned over and become one of these totally Republican states. So it was really, really saw how folks, deep down, how good they were and what good neighbors they were. And even, neighbors to people they didn't know, not to strangers, not just those they'd grown up with. So it was a really, in that way, a good experience of remembering the heart and soul of a lot of these folks that, have got very different perspectives than I do these days.
Is there anything that we can all do to assist with the ongoing recovery efforts?
Well, if you've got a couple $1 million laying around, the Apple Shop Archive could certainly use that. We are, we had something like 24 million items in the archive, and we've got them now. A fair amount of video has been sent to Speck Brothers, and audio's been spent to another place, and film, which they said, leave it, just put it in plastic bags with all the mud and the water in it. So it's gone to some film labs. And we are starting to get some of this material cleaned and digitized. And, you all at Media Burn just announced the digitization, the end product of doing some of our tapes. I guess you got them before the flood, thankfully. But that's just going to be a long process, and then we have to figure out where our home is going to be. We don't want to leave Letcher County for sure, but we're not quite sure where we're going to end up. And the mutual aid, the East Kentucky Mutual Aid, which has a Facebook page, they are always very happy to get donations. And one of the things they found was really helpful. The area got flooded with water bottles, which were needed for a while, but then there were just cases and cases and cases of water that sit out in the sun and went bad, and toilet paper and things like that. And so what they really figured out, it was better just to give people money and give them some cash, and then they could go, to the store, they could get what they needed. They knew, what cleaning supplies they needed or household things. So that's been a really wonderful volunteer effort that's really helped a lot of folks in the area.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't really know I think there's going to be some resources for housing, but there's always going to be needs. One of the cool projects, Malcolm Wilson, the photographer, kind of trained this whole group of young teenagers to be documentarians of the flood, and so now they're working on a project where they'll come to Chicago, they'll go to Los Angeles and exchange their work with other kids, show their stuff, get to see some museums. I think there's some cool stuff that's come out of this that is really built from the process of assaying yourself, looking deeper into what happened. And I think those aren't kind of charity activities and taking care of people who are in trouble right now. But in the long run, those will be very important for the community to have young artists stay there, look at the community in deeper ways.
Well, great. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This has been a really wonderful event. We're going to try a new experimental feature, which is that we're going to have the equivalent of like walking into the hall to talk afterwards. So for 5 minutes, we'll stay on. We're going to stop the recording. If anyone wants to just say hello before leaving, you can. We're going to see if this works out. If not, no harm. We'll just exit in a couple minutes. So again, thank you for joining us all tonight. This is going to be the end of the formal program, and we hope you join us in 1 week for Beyond Media's Women in Prison program. Films produced by women who were incarcerated and exploring the impact of incarceration on their communities. All right.
Amy, where'd the twins go?
Hopefully
To
they put
bed, they're
clothes on
supposed
that
to.